Ya Ali Madad. Welcome to this week's Aga Khan Health Board cooking demonstration. In these demonstrations, we bring you healthier recipes for home-style cooking dishes from various regions around the world, including Mediterranean, Central and South Asian, as well as East African. All of today's recipes, along with more than 90 others, including kid-friendly versions, are on the AKHB's Recipe and More website found at akhb.thesmileyusa.org/recipes. My name is Karani Samigani, and I am a registered nurse currently working at a trauma facility. My background includes working in ER, intensive care, cardiac trauma, and perioperative units. We are honored to have Alisha Virani leading the nutritional discussion today. Alisha is a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. She currently works with Atlanta's underserved diabetes population at Grady Memorial Hospital, where she provides medical nutrition therapy to manage type 1 and type 2 diabetes. She has been serving for many years as a member of the Aga Khan Health Board nutrition team. Today, Alisha will be enlightening us on health benefits of healthier cooking and will be answering your questions at the end of the session. Our cook today is Zarina Tejani. Zarina has been cooking from a young age. She's passionate about healthy cooking and alternatives. She enjoys experimenting with cuisines from different cultures. If you have any questions during the cooking demo, please send them to us by typing them in the Q&A box. We will try our best to answer all the questions towards the end. As a reminder, all of today's recipes are on the AKHB's Recipe and More website at akhb.thesmileyusa.org/recipes. Without further delay, let's go ahead and get started with our cooking demo.
For our first recipe, we will need 2 pieces of minced garlic cloves, 1 tablespoon paprika, 4 4-ounce Atlantic salmon pieces, 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper, half a teaspoon of onion powder, half a teaspoon of ground chili pepper, 1 lemon wedge, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and half a teaspoon of salt. Combine all the dry spices in a bowl along with the minced garlic and mix well into a paste-like consistency. Notice for this recipe, we are using mostly spice powders instead of spice salts. So for example, we are using onion powder instead of onion salt. This is important in order to limit our salt intake when cooking. We're still using half a teaspoon of salt, so it's not to say we're completely eliminating salt in cooking, but we definitely want to make sure we're limiting how much we use, while also enhancing the flavor of our recipes by using other aromatic flavorful spices. It is important to keep our salt intake to less than 2,000 milligrams per day, which is about 1 teaspoon. This recipe calls for half of that, but that is split up between 4 servings, which is what this recipe provides. Usually people tend to get the most amount of salt in their diets from packaged or processed foods. This is also why we are creating our own spice blend instead of using one that is pre-packaged, because a lot of times they contain a lot of salt. We can control how much salt we put into our spice mixture. You can Google recipes for various spice blends that we typically use in our traditional cooking if you're interested in making your own. Otherwise, if you're purchasing ready-made spice mixes, just make sure the sodium content is less than 140 milligrams per serving. So now we are taking our olive oil and rubbing it on all sides of the salmon pieces. Then we'll go ahead and rub our spice mixture on all sides of the salmon. So while we're putting the olive oil and spice mixture on the salmon, let's talk a little bit about oils. Because we will be using a medium to low heat setting for the salmon, olive oil is a great oil to use for this recipe. Olive oil has a low heat point, meaning if we were to use it at a high temperature setting, it would burn off. Olive oil also has heart protective nutrients like omega-3 fats and contains specific plant-based nutrients called polyphenols, which have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, specifically when it comes to heart health. Other options that can give you some of the same nutrients are canola oil, flaxseed oil, avocado oil, but really you could use any oil that's liquid at room temperature for this recipe. Oils that are solid at room temperature are the ones that you want to greatly limit or even avoid, especially if you're someone managing heart disease. This is because these types of fats contain saturated fats, which has been shown to increase cholesterol. So examples of those types of fats would include ghee or coconut oil. So definitely limit how much of those types of fats you're using while cooking. So we just want to make sure we're getting that spice mixture into the salmon, rubbing it well so that it captures the flavor that we want it to give us. We haven't even cooked it yet and it's already looking very good. Good, that looks great. So now we'll take our salmon over to the stove and heat a non-stick pan on the medium to low setting. And then we can go ahead and place the fish on the non-stick pan and cook for about 3 to 4 minutes on one side. And you can cook skin down first. It's always easier to keep the skin on the salmon and cook it, and then you can always take the skin off when you're eating the salmon after it's cooked. So we'll cook it 3 to 4 minutes on one side, and then we'll turn the fish and cook it for an additional 3 to 4 minutes until it's cooked thoroughly. So if you have a meat thermometer at home or any kind of cooking thermometer, you want to make sure the fish is at least 145 degrees Fahrenheit for the internal temperature. Also note that instead of cooking in a pan, this fish may be cooked on a grill as well. So you can place the fish at 300 degrees Fahrenheit on the grill for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then turn the fish and cook again for another 3 to 4 minutes. Not all fats are created equal. You may have heard salmon being a fatty type of fish, but it contains the good kind of fat and is also a great protein option. Salmon is rich in omega-3 fats, which is the healthy fat, and it's low in saturated fats, which is the unhealthy fat. There is strong evidence that shows eating fish, 1 to 2 servings of fish per week specifically, or about 6 ounces of fish per week, can reduce the risk of heart disease. Getting a variety of protein from lean meats, fish, and plant-based foods are all part of a healthy eating pattern. Wild-caught salmon is usually the best type of salmon to buy compared to farmed salmon. According to the USDA, a small fillet of wild salmon has fewer calories and half the fat content compared to the same amount of farmed salmon. Farmed salmon may have slightly more omega-3 fats, but it also has more saturated fat, about 20% more, and that's the fat that we do not want. When buying any kind of fish, it should look as fresh as possible. That means no brown spots on the flesh and no bruising on the skin. The flesh should be firm and look smooth and glossy, without any slits or holes, and it should not smell fishy. If you notice the color of the salmon we were using before we put the spice mixture on, it was a light pink color. A common myth when shopping for salmon is that color is the best indicator of quality. However, this is not always true. Different varieties of salmon range in color. So if you're getting sockeye salmon, that has a deeper red color, while coho salmon has more of a pale pink color. And Atlantic salmon, like the one we're using today, can range anywhere from a white color to a light orange color. All are flavorful and good for you, so really the best option is to make sure you're getting the wild caught salmon so that you're making sure you're getting a good amount of omega-3 fats and a low amount of saturated fat. Other types of fish that have omega-3 fats also are tuna, mackerel, herring, sardines, and anchovies. Sardines, anchovies, and tuna are commonly found canned. If the canned version is an option you choose for convenience, just make sure you're looking at the sodium content on the nutrition label and sticking to a lower sodium option. It's also best to buy canned fish in water instead of oil. Otherwise, fresh fish is always a good option. So now we're going to go ahead and turn our salmon over to the other side to cook for another 3 to 4 minutes. So like I said earlier, a good way to know if the salmon is done is to check the internal temperature and make sure it's at 145 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you don't have a meat thermometer, the other way to check to see if your salmon is done is to gently press down on top of the fillet with a fork or with your finger. And if the flesh of the salmon flakes, so if it separates easily along the white lines that run across the fillet, then you know that it's finished cooking. So it shouldn't look stringy when you try to flake the pieces of salmon. It should really just fall off pretty easily. And if you're not a fan of any of these fish options, you can always use any fish that you like. Because even if it doesn't have omega-3 fats in it, it'll still be a good source of protein. And remember, you can definitely get omega-3 fats from other food sources like the olive oil, the canola oil, or the flaxseed oil that we discussed earlier. You could even just get them from regular flax seeds or chia seeds that maybe you put into a smoothie or oatmeal or even on top of your cereal. And you can also get omega-3 from walnuts. So plenty of other places to get this nutrient. So we just have a couple more minutes to cook the salmon, and we want to make sure we're just cooking it on all sides. So not only top and bottom, but also the side of the fish. And make sure you don't see any translucent pieces on the fillet. There are so many great recipes for salmon out there that make it taste good. I think one of my favorites is really using lemon juice and some fresh herbs, and probably the easiest way. You can also bake it in the oven. So there's a lot of different ways that you can make salmon. It looks like we're almost getting to the point where it's done. And this is the first part of the recipe. So we're going to show you what we're going to pair the salmon with. The sweet potato and the mango salsa will be coming up next, and that's going to be what we serve on the side of the salmon. So there are a lot of different flavors that are coming together for this dish. Okay, so it looks like it's just about ready. So probably at this point you can use your finger or your fork to see if the salmon flakes off to make sure that it's cooked well. Otherwise, you can also just use your meat thermometer to check the internal temperature and make sure it's at 145 degrees Fahrenheit. And once you feel like it's done, go ahead and take it out on a plate and put it to the side. And we can move on to our next recipe. Looks delicious. For a sweet potato recipe, we'll need 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/4 teaspoon of dried rosemary, 2 pieces of sweet potatoes, 1 teaspoon of red chili powder, 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Before you start this recipe, you might want to preheat the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit so that by the time we're done peeling and slicing our sweet potato, the oven will be ready. Using a vegetable peeler, you can peel the potatoes and slice it to the thickness that you prefer. Thinner slices will be easier to cook. Thicker slices just may take a little bit more time. Sweet potatoes are a complex carbohydrate, and it has a lower glycemic index compared to white potatoes. So this just means that it doesn't spike your blood sugar as quickly. And that's likely because of all the fiber and nutrients that sweet potatoes have. Sweet potatoes are not only rich in fiber, but they also have vitamin A and vitamin C, as you can tell by the orange color of the sweet potato, and manganese, which helps regulate our metabolism, blood sugars, and is associated with decreasing inflammation in the body. Sweet potatoes also provide the fiber and antioxidants that are beneficial for our gut health. This recipe is a great start to add more sweet potato into your diet. Just be cautious about sweet potato dishes that use a lot of sugar and butter, kind of like sweet potato pie, because the health benefits won't be as great if we're adding sugar and fat to our ingredient. So now we can go ahead and slice the sweet potato. For whatever recipes you tend to use white potatoes, try to see if sweet potato would be a good substitute, just because it provides a little bit more nutrition. You can do things like make French fries from sweet potatoes, so sweet potato French fries that are baked in the oven. You can try to just roast sweet potatoes and season them with a little bit of black pepper and chili powder. So now we'll add the sweet potato slices into a bowl and add in our spices. So we'll start with the garlic powder. Then we'll put in our rosemary, and you can also use fresh rosemary. So 2 sprigs would be good for this recipe. Then add in the chili powder, the black pepper, the salt, and then lastly we'll also add the olive oil. And then we'll just combine everything well to make sure that all the sweet potato pieces are coated with the spice and olive oil. Once you have everything well mixed, you can take a cookie sheet and maybe layer it with some wax paper or some foil and place each of the sweet potato pieces on the cookie sheet and make sure they don't overlap so that they cook evenly. So now we can take our sweet potatoes and put it in the oven at 400 degrees. And then we'll set our timer for 5 to 7 minutes, just depending on how thick your sweet potato is. But you can always start with 5 minutes and check it once it's done to see if you need to cook it longer. Perfect. And they should be done. So now we'll go ahead and turn each of the sweet potato slices over. So that we can also cook it evenly on the other side. And then put it back in the oven for an additional 5 to 7 minutes. Great. And now the sweet potatoes should be ready. For the mango salsa, we'll need 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of chopped cilantro, 3/4 cup of diced mango, 1 fresh chopped jalapeno, 1/4 cup diced red onion, and 2 tablespoons of freshly squeezed orange juice. In a medium glass bowl, we'll combine all of these ingredients. This mango salsa is such a great option for the summertime, especially with all the other fresh ingredients we're adding to enhance the flavors. This makes it such a great way to increase flavor of even your main dish, which in our case is the salmon. Mangoes offer a variety of nutrients. In 1 cup of mango, you're getting 2.5 grams of fiber and 67% of the recommended daily intake of vitamin C. Mangoes are also a great source of vitamin A. You may not think of it, but using mango in a salsa can give you a sweet and savory flavor profile that pairs perfectly with the salmon and sweet potatoes. For the chickpea salad, we will need 4 cups of water, 1 cup of soaked chickpeas, 1/4 teaspoon baking soda, 1 chopped jalapeno pepper, 1 teaspoon of ground cumin, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of chopped cilantro, 1 medium chopped red onion, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1 large chopped tomato, 1 medium chopped cucumber, and 3 to 4 shredded lettuce leaves. To start, we will combine the 4 cups of water into a large pot. And then we'll take our chickpeas and boil it in this water, along with the baking soda. We'll place our pot over medium heat. And we'll cook for about 20 minutes until the chickpeas become tender. After the 20 minutes, we'll want to check and see if the chickpeas are tender just by using our fingers and feeling how soft they are. Good, looks like it's ready. So now you'll turn off the heat and drain the water from the chickpeas and put the chickpeas into a large salad bowl. Chickpeas are a type of legume and come in many different varieties, including beige, black, green, or even red. Chickpeas are rich in fiber and protein and are a good source of iron, phosphorus, and folate. The type of fiber in chickpeas enhances our gut health and can increase feelings of fullness when we eat them with our meals. Chickpeas are also a great meat substitute for those who are vegetarian or who are trying to incorporate a more plant-based protein into their diet. Chickpeas are widely available either dried or canned. For this recipe, we used dried chickpeas and soaked them for 4 to 5 hours to help speed up the cooking time. If you're buying canned chickpeas, however, just make sure that you're purchasing a no salt added option and are rinsing them off. Great. So now that our chickpeas are in our bowl, we can add the rest of our salad ingredients. So we'll go ahead and add the tomato. We'll add the chopped cucumber. We'll add in the cilantro, the red onion, the lemon juice, the salt, add in the cumin, and then the jalapeno peppers. Looking at this salad, there are some great colors in here. It's important to try to get a variety of different colors when we're eating vegetables, not just green vegetables. All of them contain different types of nutrients that are important for the body. And now we can serve this chickpea salad over our lettuce leaves. This salad is a really well-balanced salad because it has your major food groups. Your vegetables are covered, the starch and protein are covered with just one ingredient, the chickpeas. So even if you wanted to have this as a meal, this would be a pretty balanced meal. For this recipe, we'll need 1/8 cup of pistachios, 1/8 cup of almonds, 1½ tablespoons of edible gum, 2 pieces of javitri, 5 pieces of cardamom, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1 teaspoon poppy seeds, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1/4 cup of sugar-free coconut, 1 drop of yellow food color, 2½ cups of fat-free milk, and cooking oil spray. To start, we'll take the edible gum and blend it in either a blender or a coffee grinder. We want to make sure that this is turning into a fine powder. Next, we'll blend the almonds and the pistachios. And then we'll blend the 5 pieces of cardamom and the 2 pieces of javitri. Next, we'll take our milk, cooking oil, the ground cardamom and javitri, the nutmeg and the shredded coconut, and we'll keep it ready by the stove to use. Place a non-stick saucepan over medium to high heat. And evenly spray the cooking oil for 2 seconds to coat the pan. Then we'll add the 2½ cups of milk and bring it to a rolling boil. We're using fat-free milk for this recipe to reduce the saturated fat. Once the milk has boiled, immediately reduce to low heat. And now we can add in the coconut, the cardamom and Javitri spice mix, and the nutmeg. Let the milk simmer for about an hour. You can set a timer for an hour. And while this is simmering, just continue to stir until the mixture is reduced to half and turns to a light golden brown color. So now we can go ahead and add the yellow food color. And you might want to do this slowly just to control how much of the color you want. And then we'll add the edible gum and continue to stir. You can also spray a little more cooking oil to the milk mixture and then again continue to stir. As you're mixing this, you're going to start to see the mixture becoming a little bit thicker. You can continue to slowly add 1 drop of the yellow food color to get the desired color you want for the faki. And it comes from the sap of plants. So it's usually bought as dried sap. And for this recipe, the edible gum will give the faki the doughy consistency. So as you can see, it's starting to become a little bit more thick. And you can see the color has started to turn to a brown color. So once that happens, we'll add the ground almond and pistachio and the sugar. And we'll just make sure to combine all of these ingredients well. Make sure it's evenly distributed into the dough mixture. You can spray cooking oil for another 2 seconds on this mixture. This is just to prevent it from sticking to the pan. And then we'll keep stirring until the mixture starts leaving the sides of the pan, becoming a soft dough. So now in a 5-inch square or rectangle pan, you can evenly spray cooking oil for about a second or two. And then we can pour the dough into the pan. So you can flatten the dough evenly with the back of a spoon. And from here, just slice it into 4 pieces. Or if you want to make it into round pieces, you can spray your hands with some cooking oil and take part of the dough to roll into 6 round pieces. When making a dessert like this on your own, you can control how big or small you want the pieces to be, and it's a great way to practice portion control. This is an excellent recipe for holidays or other festivities. And if you were looking to decrease the sugar content of this recipe, you could always use a sugar substitute. But I think if you were just to stick to one piece and follow the 3-bite rule, which is basically taking the first bite to try it, the second bite to eat it, and the third bite to finish it, then having this sort of treat every once in a while would be completely fine. So now with each piece, you can coat it in the poppy seeds. Whether you sprinkle it on or you completely coat it into the poppy seeds, however you like to do it. And then you can add a slice of slivered almond on top for presentation. So taking a typical sweet treat and adding some nutrient-dense ingredients can really make this just a little bit healthier. So for this recipe, we use the ground pistachios and almonds. Nuts are a great way to add some healthier fats into a recipe. We also ended up using skim milk instead of whole or 2% milk, and that was to reduce the saturated fat like I mentioned earlier. And then even using the cooking oil spray instead of just using regular cooking oil, because that just helps control how much of the spray or the oil we're using. And then to really enhance the flavor of this faki, we used whole pieces of the cardamom and javitri and freshly ground it. And this is usually going to give a little bit more flavor and essence to a recipe when you're freshly grounding it versus when you just buy your spices already ground. Either option would be perfectly fine for this recipe, but I have a feeling this faki is going to be very flavorful because we use the whole spice. This is looking very mouth-watering. Wow. Great way to end our meal. So from our cooking demonstration today, we made the salmon fillet, served with a little bit of the mango salsa, either on the side or on top. Paired with a side of the sweet potatoes, the seasoned sweet potatoes. And then we have our chickpea salad as an appetizer. And then to end on a sweet note, we have our Kheer Ki Faki. Looks delicious. I hope you guys enjoyed the demonstration and are able to try this at home.
All right. Thank you so much, Alisha and Zarina, for showing us these delicious, hearty recipes. Can't wait to try. So we have some really good questions from our participants that have come up. So let's move on to our Q&A. Our first question is, are sweet potatoes and yams the same thing? Alisha?
Yes, thank you, Kiranisa. That is a really good question. So, yams and sweet potatoes are used interchangeably in recipes, but they are actually two different types of root vegetables. Sweet potatoes tend to have a higher concentration of most of our nutrients and they have a higher amount of fiber. And yams are also a little bit starchier, but I think in terms of the flavors, they're very similar.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next question. Great question here. What is the difference between wild caught and farmed fish?
Yes, I get that question a lot. So I mentioned this in the cooking demonstration, but whether you buy your salmon fresh or frozen, wild caught salmon is usually the best type to buy, just because according to the USDA, wild caught salmon has fewer calories than farmed. and half the saturated fat content. So remember, saturated fat is the unhealthy fat that we're trying to limit. So we want to make sure that we're buying wild caught, whether it's fresh or frozen. And just some other tips when you're buying the fish, make sure you're not seeing any brown spots on the flesh. There's no bruising on the skin. The flesh should be firm and it should look smooth and glossy without any holes in them. And it should not smell fishy.
All right. And just to elaborate on that, Alicia, what about the color? When they're shopping for salmon, should they look at the color?
So it's really going to depend on the type of salmon you buy. The colors range in variety, and it doesn't mean that the salmon is less nutritious. So for example, if you're buying sockeye salmon, that tends to have a deeper red color. If you're buying coho salmon, it tends to be more pale pink. The Atlantic salmon that we used was a lighter color, but that color ranges from white to light orange, just depending on, if they're wild caught, where they are in the ocean, and their environmental factors. So all would be good, all would be flavorful. I think the best way to look at it is from what I mentioned earlier, just making sure the flesh is firm and smooth and glossy.
All right, great to know. Also, if you can expand on whether, if there are any other fish options to use for this similar recipe.
Yes. So other things that you could probably use, mahi mahi is a really good option. Cod is a good option. Um, Halibut is another great option. So those would be good.
All right, and how about, we have a great question. Can we eat fish with skin on it?
Yes. So just as long as the fish has been properly cleaned and the outer scales are fully removed, the skin is typically safe to eat. And it does actually have some of the omega-3 in there. Now, that just depends on your preference. If you don't like the skin, you don't have to eat it, but it's definitely safe to eat it.
Wow, did not know that. That's awesome. Okay. Another question. What are some other plant-based protein options?
Yes, this is such a good question. So, any dried beans, so for example, black beans, kidney beans, navy beans, any of those type of legumes would be great. Lentils, which we tend to eat a lot of in our community. You can do quinoa, tofu, nuts and seeds. And then for people who are strictly trying to follow a vegetarian diet, you can definitely get protein from Brussels sprouts, broccoli, corn, asparagus, or even artichoke. So there are definitely some vegetables that have protein in them as well.
That's so good. We've always saying that it's only meat, that has protein, but there are so many other options, like you mentioned, quinoa and tofu and so on. That's great. Um, Another question, Alicia, that's good here. Can I use an Instant Pot to pre-cook the chickpeas to reduce the 1 hour cook time?
Absolutely. I think even for me, Instant Pot has been a lifesaver, has saved so much time in cooking. So yes, definitely try to use the Instapot. Usually there are different settings, and I guess depending on which Instapot you have, you might just have to do a quick Google search for how long it should take, but it can definitely help reduce the cooking time.
All right. And then there's another one. It says difference between canned beans and dried beans, and which one or the other is easy for digestion?
That is such a great question. So I know that a lot of people get indigestion when they eat beans. Dried beans tend to be a little bit easier on digestion, and I think that's likely because most people will soak them before cooking. Canned beans also tend to cause more indigestion, and that's because there is gas producing. It's a specific type of carbohydrate that is producing that is found in the liquid of canned beans. So you want to make sure, even when you're buying no salt added canned beans, you still want to rinse off that liquid because that's what tends to make the indigestion worse. Other suggestions, though, would be to maybe even just try lentils. That's still a legume, it's still a plant-based protein, but that tends to be a little bit easier just because they don't have that specific gas-producing carbohydrate. Other ideas, if you're new to including beans in your diet, doing it slowly and gradually, not going from 0 to 100, that can really help. And then making sure that you chew very well because you have enzymes in your saliva that will help break down those specific gas producing carbs. So just take your time while you're eating, and that can also help too.
All right, great. Thank you, Alicia. We'll move on to our next question, and says, which oil is better to use? Olive oil versus flaxseed versus canola oil?
Yes, very good question. I think the only thing you want to keep in mind when choosing um, these specific unsaturated fatty oils is to make sure that you're paying attention to the heat point of the oils. So like I mentioned in the cooking demonstration, olive oil has a lower heat point. That just means that it burns off at higher temperatures. So like the salmon recipe that we did, we cooked it on a low to medium heat, and that's perfect for olive oil. So if you're doing any sauteing, stir frying, roasting, or even just marinating, olive oil is a great choice. But for any other type of cooking that uses a higher heat point, you can use something else like flaxseed oil, avocado oil, canola oil, grapeseed oil, any one of those.
All right, good to know. And the next question actually pertains to Kheer Ki Faki. By the way, that looked so good. So the question is, can the food color be avoided in Kheer Ki Faki?
Yeah, I mean, it can, the color is just going to be lighter. But if you want to avoid it, you can. Now, a good substitute, if you want something a little bit more natural, I believe in this recipe, if you were to peel and dice golden beets and soak them in water, that will help with the color. Um, Something else we use for a substitute for yellow food coloring is turmeric, haldi, and water, but that's definitely going to change the flavor of the faki. So you just want to make sure that I think that golden beets soaked in water would be a good substitute. Otherwise, you can definitely leave it out.
You know what? I did not know that we could. That's, I think, yes. And plus, it's so high in iron, right? The beet,
The beets.
then yes, it brings, I guess, additional nutritional values.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Alicia. There is another good question here. Is cayenne a good substitute for chili powder?
Sure. Cayenne pepper is more spicy. So it depends on your level of spice tolerance. If you want to use that, I think that's a good substitute.
Okay. You know, we all love mangoes. So, is mango good for diabetics?
Yeah. So, as always, you want to make sure that you're eating in moderation. And so you don't want to eat the whole mango, especially if you're somebody who has diabetes. So, actually, 3/4 cup of diced mango is one serving. But also remember, if you're somebody with diabetes eating this specific meal, you also have to remember that you're eating the sweet potato and the faki as well. So that those two also contain carbohydrates. So overall, you just want to be portioning each of those items to make sure you're maintaining normal blood sugars.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question here. Any substitute for edible gum, and where can we get that from?
So actually, edible gum is found everywhere. At your main grocery stores, if you look in the bakery section, they will usually have it there. Even Amazon, if you wanted to use it. And again, I think, like I said, it's made from dried sap, and it just makes your meal a little bit thicker. So a substitute you could use for edible gum is chia seeds or flax seeds. So you could do 1 tablespoon of chia seed or flaxseed in 3 tablespoons of water, and slowly stir it. And that will help to make your recipe, or the faki in this case, a little bit thicker and more doughy.
Okay. All right. Move on to the next question. Can oil spray be avoided, and can we use a small amount of oil instead?
So just to be clear, oil sprays are perfectly fine to use. And I know there's always a lot of questions about the sprays, but they're definitely, especially with the Food and Drug Administration, they're deemed safe. So we don't have to be scared of it. But if you absolutely don't want to use it, then you can definitely use a small amount of oil. The reason why we use cooking oil sprays is just because it controls the portions. So if you can control it on your own, then that's completely fine.
Got it. Got it. All right. And what other kind of milk can be used to make make the faki, can we use carnation milk?
I guess it depends which carnation. So probably not the condensed carnation milk just because that's loaded with sugar. If we're doing the evaporated milk, you can still do like a low fat or a skim. So they have 2% or skim. We used skim milk in this recipe, and that was to control or really limit the saturated fat from the milk.
All right. Thank you. And what about, the evaporated carnation they have? I know the fat-free one.
Yes.
Would that cut down the saturated fat content?
Yes, absolutely. And evaporated milk, I think, also cuts down the time to make the dough-like consistency because it's evaporated. So it might be a quicker process too.
Awesome. All right. What are some sugar substitutes that we can use in the faki?
This is really based on your preference. So, for example, sugar substitutes would be like Splenda, stevia, sweet and low, equal. So, any of those, depending on your preference. Just remember, sugar substitutes are definitely a lot sweeter than regular sugar, and for the reason to just make sure you're using less than you normally would. So I haven't really done the equivalent, but you can definitely use the sugar substitute and have that instead in the faki.
Okay. Thank you, Alicia. So this other next question is actually about poppy seeds. Are they fatty?
Good fatty. They actually have a higher content of unsaturated fats compared to saturated fats. So, like 1 tablespoon will only have half a gram of saturated fat, but about 3 grams of unsaturated fat. So, it's definitely a good option.
Oh, awesome. So it's got good fat. So
Yeah.
it's okay to consume. Awesome. All right. And what about tilapia? How is tilapia fish? Is it good?
Tilapia fish is a good source of protein. Um, it doesn't really have any other nutritional value, but it does, I mean, it's still a good protein source. So if that's what you enjoy, then that's fine.
Okay. All right. We've got some great questions that are coming in, but due to lack of time, we'll take few last questions here. So eating fish and milk together, is it okay or is it dangerous or is it a myth?
Um, it's definitely okay. I hear a lot about food combining and why that could cause some issues, but honestly, there is no research to say that we need to be this specific about how we eat our foods. If you guys remember the plate method that we use when we talk about nutrition, um, you're eating all 5 food groups at one time, right? So there isn't really any dangerous or health negative effects when you're eating fish and milk together.
All right, and I remember growing up, mommy says I don't drink milk and eat fish together. So this is good to know that it's really a myth. All
Yeah.
right. All right. Thank you, Alicia. We'll take our last question here. Any health benefits of edible gum? I guess it's also known as gund that's found in Desi stores.
Yes, definitely. So, yeah, I forgot to mention that you can find that edible gum in Desi stores, but because edible gum comes from plants, it's the sap of specific plants. They do have a little bit of like your minerals. I'm blanking on which specific ones right now, but they do have a small amount of minerals and they do have some fiber. With the amount that we use in the recipe, it's very negligible. I mean, it's not enough to gain any sort of grand nutrition, but it has some.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Alisha, for answering these wonderful questions that we were getting from the audience. And thank you, everyone, for joining Saturday afternoon with us.